They thought it was just another ugly fight in a roadside diner. One slap, no warning. Too many witnesses. The room froze. Phones came up. Everyone picked a side. A stranger stood up to stop it. Calm, silent, no uniform, no badge. Just someone who refused to look away. But what no one realized this moment wasn't breaking down. It was being built. Before we show you how a single decision turned the whole room upside down, drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. Tap subscribe and turn on notifications, because this story doesn't end the way anyone expects. The heat lay heavy over the Arizona highway, unmoving and relentless, pressing against glass, metal, and skin alike. The Red Mesa Grill squatted beside the interstate like it had been there forever. Sun-bleached siding, dust-caked windows, and a flickering neon sign that buzzed even in daylight. Inside, the air conditioning rattled and sighed, never quite winning the fight against the summer. The smell of frying oil, grilled meat, and burned coffee lingered thick in the air, clinging to clothes and hair. Vinyl booths stuck faintly to bare arms. Ceiling fans spun lazily, pushing warm air in slow, useless circles. At a corner booth near the back sat Evan Miller and Laura Miller, facing each other across a table scarred with years of careless plates and spilled drinks. Evan leaned forward, elbows planted wide, posture aggressive without him seeming to notice. He was 38, broad-shouldered, thick through the chest and neck, the kind of man built by physical work rather than a gym. His forearms were muscular and veined, tanned, dark from long days outdoors. A short, neatly trimmed beard framed his jaw, and sweat beaded along his hairline beneath close-cropped brown hair. His face carried sharp angles, high cheekbones, a square jaw, and eyes that never quite softened even when he smiled. With strangers, Evan could be charming. With people he knew, especially those close to him, the patience wore thin. Laura sat upright across from him, her posture almost unnaturally controlled. She was 34, slim and lightly built, with narrow shoulders and long arms folded close to her body. Her auburn hair was pulled back into a low ponytail, exposing the pale line of her neck. Her skin was fair, lightly freckled across the nose, and collarbones the kind that burned easily in the desert sun. She wore a sleeveless white blouse and faded jeans, simple clothes chosen for heat and practicality. Her face was delicate, but not weak, sharp green eyes, fine lips, and cheekbones that caught the diner's harsh light when she turned her head. Laura had learned how to disappear in plain sight. Stillness came easily to her. Their plates sat half-finished. Fries had gone limp. Ice melted slowly in their glasses, water pooling on the tabletop. "You always do this," Evan said, his voice low but tight fingers tapping once-twice against the table. "Every time we're out." Laura didn't answer right away. Her gaze drifted past him, unfocused, resting on the smudged window, where heat shimmered just beyond the glass. Her breathing was shallow, measured. "I'm not doing this here," she said finally. Evan snorted. "You already are." A waitress passing by slowed just enough to notice, then quickened her pace, eyes sliding away. Arguments were common here. Travelers snapped. Locals snapped. Heat did that to people. Still, something in Evan's tone drew attention, the sharp edge beneath the words. "You wait," Evan continued. "You wait until we're in public, when you think I won't say anything back." Laura's fingers curled around her water glass. The ice clinked softly as she lifted it, then set it back down with care, aligning it perfectly with the edge of the table. "I said not here," she repeated. Evan's chair scraped loudly against the floor as he pushed it back and half stood. His palm struck the table hard enough to rattle silverware. Don't tell me where I can talk, he snapped. Nearby conversations faltered. A radio at the counter was turned down. The air felt suddenly thinner. Laura looked up at him, then meeting his eyes. There was no panic in her expression, no fear. If anything, there was distance, as if she had stepped somewhere Evan couldn't reach. "Sit down," she said quietly. Evan let out a sharp laugh. Or what? The sound of skin striking skin cracked through the diner. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't loud. It was fast and sudden and unmistakable. Evan's hand connected with Laura's cheek, snapping her head to the side. Her chair tipped slightly as she caught herself against the table. A gasp rippled through the room. Someone dropped a fork. Laura didn't scream. She didn't cry. She didn't raise a hand to her face. For a few seconds, she simply sat there, frozen eyes unfocused, breath shallow and quick. A red mark bloomed across her cheekbone, vivid against pale skin. Evan stood over her chest, heaving his own expression, flickering between anger and something like surprise. "Don't push me," he muttered. Time stretched. The diner seemed to hold its breath, every eye fixed on the booth, waiting for something. A shout, an apology, a reaction. Laura slowly turned her head back toward him. Her face was blank. Not shocked, not broken. Blank. She inhaled once sharply, then let the breath out through her nose. Her hands rested flat on the table, fingers spread, steadying herself. She did not cry. She did not ask for help. She did not look around for sympathy. Instead, she sat there in silence. The room stilled. The ceiling fans continued their lazy rotations. The neon sign buzzed faintly. Somewhere near the counter, a coffee pot clicked as it reheated. No one spoke. No one moved. Laura's silence pressed heavier than any scream could have. It carried weight unanswered and unsettling. People shifted in their seats, suddenly unsure of where to look, what to do, or whose side they were on. Evan's jaw tightened. He waited for her to react, for anger, for fear, for tears. Nothing came, just silence. And in that silence, the entire diner seemed to understand something was wrong, deeply, unsettlingly wrong. No one knew whether what they were witnessing was shock, or the beginning of something far more deliberate. Daniel Cross did not move quickly. He moved decisively. He rose from his stool at the counter with the unhurried control of someone who had learned long ago that speed without balance only made things worse. At 42, Daniel was tall and lean-built, more like a distance runner than a brawler, his frame shaped by discipline rather than bulk. His dark hair was cut short, streaked with gray at the temples, and a permanent shadow of stubble lined his jaw. His face carried hard angles, high cheekbones, a straight nose once broken, and set clean eyes the color of steel under desert light. Those eyes had learned to read rooms before rooms knew they were being read. At his feet rose Rex, a German shepherd, with a sable coat dark along the spine and lighter at the flanks, 5 years old and fully trained. Rex's ears came up first, then his body smooth and silent muscles coiling beneath fur. He did not bare his teeth. He didn't need to. His presence alone changed the air. "Hey, Daniel," said voice low, steady cutting through the silence without raising volume. "That's enough." Evan Miller turned sharply, his face still flushed breath, uneven. Up close, his features looked harsher, jaw-clenched beard framing a mouth pulled tight by anger. He squared his shoulders instinctively, the way men do when challenged by another man. "Mind your business," Evan snapped. Daniel took one step closer, not crowding, not backing away. He positioned himself at an angle not directly between Evan and Laura, but close enough that escalation would have to go through him. When someone gets hit, Daniel said calmly, it becomes everyone's business. Rex shifted forward, half a step, body-angled eyes locked on Evan's hands, not threatening, alert. Laura still hadn't spoken. She remained seated, fingers flat against the table, her breathing now slower, more controlled. The red mark on her cheek stood out starkly. When she lifted her gaze, it passed Daniel briefly before settling on Evan. Something unreadable flickered behind her green eyes. Calculation, not fear. Evan scoffed. You some kind of cop? No, Daniel replied. Just someone telling you to stop. A woman from the next booth leaned back slightly, phone already halfway raised. She was middle-aged, blonde hair, pulled into a messy bun, eyes wide with a mixture of concern and curiosity. Others followed her lead. Screens glinted. Red Mesa Grill had shifted from diner to stage. That was when Laura stood. The movement was sudden enough to draw a collective intake of breath. She pushed her chair back slowly, deliberately rising to her full height, slim, almost fragile at first glance, but steadier than she looked. Don't, Laura said sharply, not to Evan, but to Daniel. Her voice had changed. Gone was the quiet restraint. In its place was something sharper, louder, edged with heat. You don't get to step in like this, she continued. You don't know us. Daniel turned his head slightly surprised, though his expression remained neutral. Ma'am, I'm just trying to... I didn't ask for help, Laura cut in. Evan blinked, caught off guard. Laura, she rounded on him instantly. No, you don't get to speak now. Her words came fast, tumbling over each other, rising in volume. You want to do this in front of everyone? Fine. Let's do it. People shifted. Phones lifted higher. Daniel sensed the shift immediately. This wasn't de-escalation. This was acceleration. Rex felt it too. The dog's muscles tightened, a low vibration humming in his chest. Not a growl yet, but close enough to be felt by anyone paying attention. Let's all slow this down, Daniel said, spreading his hands, slightly palms visible. Everyone take a breath. Laura laughed, a sharp, brittle sound. Oh, now we're calming down. She turned deliberately toward the room, gesturing broadly. You all see this, right? You see how fast everyone jumps in when things get uncomfortable. The room murmured. Evan stepped forward, anger flaring again. You're making this worse. No, Laura shot back. I'm making it honest. Her eyes flicked to Daniel again. For a brief moment, something colder passed between them. Recognition, maybe, or assessment. Daniel had the unsettling sense that Laura was not reacting, but directing. Sir Daniel said, turning back to Evan, take a step back. Evan hesitated. Pride warred with the eyes on him, the phones, the dog. Rex took one measured step forward. That was enough. Evan's foot slid back a fraction more instinct than choice. Sweat ran down his temple. He wiped it away roughly. This is ridiculous, he muttered. Laura exhaled slow and deliberate, then did something no one expected. She laughed. Not hysterically, not softly, just enough to be wrong. The laughter cut short as she stepped closer to Evan, jabbing a finger into his chest. You always freeze when there's witnesses, she said loudly. You hate that. Evan's face darkened. Shut up. Daniel's instincts screamed now. The situation was no longer two people arguing. It was a performance spiraling towards something dangerous. Everyone put the phones down, Daniel said louder now, authority threading into his voice. This ends here. Laura's head snapped toward him. Her eyes narrowed. You don't get to decide that. The room held its breath again. Somewhere near the counter, a chair scraped. Someone whispered, Call the cops. Daniel took another step forward, positioning himself clearly between Evan and Laura now. Rex mirrored the movement, silent, solid. Ma'am, Daniel said firm but controlled, "I'm asking you to step back." Laura stared at him for a long second. Then she smiled. It was faint, brief, and entirely out of place. The phones stayed raised. The heat pressed harder against the windows, and the tension in Red Mesa Grill tightened, not breaking yet, but stretching towards something no one could quite name. Daniel kept his hands visible, palms open, shoulders relaxed the way he had learned to do, long before words stopped working. He shifted his weight just enough to stay between Evan and Laura without turning it into a standoff. His voice stayed even low, carrying authority without volume. "Everyone, take a breath," he said. "Rick, can we get you out here?" The owner emerged from behind the counter. Rick Thompson was in his late 50s, tall but soft around the middle, with thinning gray hair combed carefully to the side and a mustache that had gone fully white years ago. His skin was weathered and pinked by sun, the look of a man who had spent decades opening the diner before dawn and closing it long after dark. Rick wore a grease-stained apron and moved with the weary caution of someone who had broken up arguments before and paid for it with aching joints. He hated conflict, but he hated police lights outside his windows even more. "What's going on?" Rick asked, already knowing the answer. Evan turned toward him, seizing the opportunity. "Your guy here," he said, jabbing a thumb toward Daniel, "is getting physical. He's got his dog threatening customers." Daniel shook his head once. "That's not what's happening." Laura let out a sudden sob, sharp, loud, startling. It drew every eye back to her. Tears streamed down her face now, fast and unchecked, cutting tracks through the red on her cheek. Her shoulders shook as if the emotion had finally broken through. "You see," she cried, "this is what he does. He turns everything around." The shift was immediate and disorienting. A few people murmured in sympathy. Someone near the window whispered, "Poor woman." Daniel felt the room tilt. He had seen this before, on bases in bars, in places where pressure made people choose sides too quickly. He kept his gaze steady on Laura, watching the timing of her breaths, the way the tears came without the hitch he expected. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "no one's accusing you of anything. Let's slow it down." Evan stepped forward again, voice rising. "You don't get to tell her anything. You don't know what she's like." Rex's chest vibrated with a low growl, barely audible but unmistakable. A couple at the next booth recoiled chairs scraping back. The dog's ears were forward eyes fixed on Evan's hands, tracking every twitch. Rex was 6 feet of instinct and training his presence, tightening the space. "Call that thing off," Evan snapped. Daniel didn't look away. "He's under control," he said. "So are you, if you choose to be." Laura's crying cut off as abruptly as it had started. She wiped her face with the back of her hand, smearing mascara, then laughed a brittle, breathless sound that didn't match the tears. "Listen to him," she said to the room. "So calm, so reasonable." She turned toward Daniel, stepping closer than before. Up close, her green eyes were bright and sharp pupils steady. The tears had vanished too quickly. "You like being the hero?" she asked softly. Daniel felt it then, the sense of being measured. Not judged, measured. "This isn't about me," he said. "But it is," Laura replied. "Isn't it?" Rick raised his hands. "Hey, We're not doing this in here. Everyone just... A chair scraped loudly as a man stood near the window. Mark Delgado, mid-30s, broad-shouldered, with a shaved head and a sunburned scalp, wore a construction company t-shirt and steel-toed boots. He had the easy confidence of someone used to stepping into physical spaces and the quick temper to match. "Someone needs to call the cops," Mark said. "This is out of hand." A woman beside him nodded vigorously, phone already at her ear. Evan latched on to the words. "Good. Call them. Let's see who gets dragged out." Daniel exhaled slowly through his nose. "Rick, please," he said again. "Get the room settled. I'll keep them separated." Rick hesitated, torn between liability and control, then nodded and moved to the counter, murmuring to the waitress to shut off the radio and stop seating new customers. Laura took advantage of the moment. She stepped past Daniel toward Evan, fast enough that Daniel had to shift sharply to block her path. Rex mirrored him, body sliding into place with silent precision. "Don't touch me," Laura snapped, though Daniel hadn't. "I'm not," he said. "I'm keeping space." Evan laughed harshly. "You see that? That's control. That's what he's doing." Phones stayed raised. The air conditioning rattled louder, straining against the heat of bodies and tension. Laura's emotions seemed to fracture, anger bleeding into fear, fear into accusation, accusation back into anger. She spoke in bursts, contradicting herself, circling the same points from different angles. To the room, she looked overwhelmed. To Daniel, it felt orchestrated, each beat landing where it needed to land. Rex's growl deepened enough to push a few more customers back toward the walls. "No one's sure anymore," someone whispered. "Who started it?" Daniel heard the uncertainty spread like a stain. He adjusted his stance again, grounding himself, refusing to be rushed into a mistake. He kept his voice calm. "Everyone, step back," he said. "This ends with space and quiet." Laura tilted her head, studying him. For a heartbeat, her face went completely still. No tears, no anger, just focus. Then Evan moved, not fast, not violent. Just enough to shift the balance, and the room surged in response. Noise rising, voices overlapping. Control slipped another inch, and the diner tipped closer to something it wouldn't be able to undo. The moment came without warning, the way real chaos always did. Evan shifted his weight a small step backward that looked like hesitation. Then his foot slid on a thin sheen of melted ice near the table leg. His balance broke unevenly. He went down hard, shoulder twisting as he fell, his arm catching beneath him at an awkward angle. The sound of his body hitting the diner floor was dull and heavy enough to make several people flinch. Evan shouted immediately. The cry was loud, raw, and convincing. He clutched his forearm with both hands, rolling slightly onto his side, face contorted in pain. Sweat and strain mixed until it was impossible to tell what was real and what was performance. "My arm. Jesus, my arm." The room erupted. Chairs scraped back. Someone swore under their breath. A woman near the counter pressed her hand to her mouth. Laura reacted instantly. She spun toward Daniel, eyes wide, voice sharp and piercing as she pointed straight at him. "He did this," she shouted. "He shoved him. I saw it." Daniel hadn't moved. He stood exactly where he had been, feet planted, hands open, his body angled toward Evan, but clearly not touching him. Rex remained at his side, alert but motionless, ears forward, tail low. "That's not what happened," Daniel said calmly. Laura ignored him. She dropped to her knees beside Evan, one hand hovering over his shoulder, the other still pointed at Daniel like a weapon. You all saw it, she cried to the room. He pushed my husband. His dog scared him. He fell because of them. The crowd fractured instantly. A man near the window shook his head. I didn't see him touch him. Another voice cut in. That dog was right there. Phones tilted, zooming in on Evan writhing on the floor. Someone whispered, "This is bad." Rick Thompson pushed through the gathering crowd, his face pale, apron twisted in his hands. Okay, he said loudly. Everyone back up, give him space. Evan groaned again, louder this time, curling his fingers as if testing sensation. I can't feel it, he gasped. I think it's broken. Laura looked up at Rick, tears spilling over again. You have to call an ambulance, please. Daniel took a slow breath, grounding himself. He crouched slightly, careful not to appear threatening, his gaze moving between Evan and Laura. Rick, he said evenly, call 911. Ask for medical and police. Laura snapped her head toward him. No, you don't get to decide that. I'm not deciding, Daniel replied. I'm asking for help. Rex shifted nails, clicking softly against the tile as he adjusted position, placing his body subtly between Daniel and the tightening ring of people. A few customers stepped back instinctively, eyes fixed on the dog. A young woman pushed her way forward from the far booth. Sarah Whitman was in her late 20s, tall and narrow-shouldered, with long blonde hair pulled into a loose braid over one collarbone. Her skin was sun-tanned, freckled across the cheeks, and her expression carried a mix of anxiety and resolve. She wore running shorts and a tank top, the look of someone who had stopped in after a workout. I was watching Sarah, said, her voice trembling but clear. He didn't touch him. He just stepped in front. Laura rounded on her instantly. So now you're calling me a liar. Sarah recoiled slightly but held her ground. I'm just saying what I saw. Evan let out another sharp cry, louder than before, clutching his arm tighter. Laura, please. She turned back to him, face crumpling with practiced desperation. Stay still. Don't move. Daniel watched closely. The way Evan's fingers flexed. The way Laura positioned herself between him and the room. The way her eyes kept flicking outward, tracking reactions, counting witnesses. This needs to slow down, Daniel said again, louder now. Everyone back up. A man near the counter raised his voice. You don't get to order people around. Daniel turned toward him. I'm not ordering. I'm preventing this from getting worse. Heat pressed in from all sides. The air conditioning rattled uselessly. Sweat ran down Daniel's spine beneath his shirt. Rick's hands shook as he pulled his phone from his pocket. I'm calling, he said. Everyone relax. Laura looked up sharply. For a fraction of a second, irritation flashed across her face before she masked it with fear. Make sure you tell them he attacked us, she said, nodding toward Daniel. Daniel met Rick's eyes. Tell them there's an injured man on the floor and a crowd that needs space. Rick swallowed and turned away to make the call. Evan shifted again, grimacing, then let his arm fall limp at an unnatural angle. A few people gasped. That doesn't look right, someone murmured. Laura seized on it. Look at him, she cried. You did this. Daniel stayed where he was. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't argue. He simply said, I didn't touch him. The accusation hung in the air, heavier than the heat. Phones stayed raised. Eyes stayed fixed on Daniel. And for the first time since he'd stood up from the counter, Daniel understood that control had already slipped, not through force, but through narrative. The police arrived with the sound of heat-distorted sirens, a slow wail that cut through the murmur inside Red Mesa Grill. 2 officers stepped in first. Their uniforms darkened with sweat before they'd crossed the threshold. The older of the 2 officers, Tom Reynolds, moved with a measured calm. He was in his early 50s, tall but slightly stooped, with a graying buzz cut and a weathered face that suggested years of desert patrols. A deep line cut between his brows, permanent from too many scenes that started loud and ended messy. His partner, Officer Lena Morales, was younger, early 30s, compact and athletic, black hair pulled tight into a bun. Her eyes missed nothing. "Everyone take a step back," Reynolds said, voice practiced and steady. "Phones down. We'll get to you." Laura clutched Evan tighter as they approached, her hands trembling just enough to be noticed. Evan lay on his side, jaw-clenched, forearm angled awkwardly across his chest. He groaned when Morales knelt beside him. "Sir, don't move," she said, her tone firm but gentle. "What hurts?" "My arm," Evan rasped. "He shoved me. I went down hard." Reynolds looked up, following Evan's gaze straight to Daniel. "And you are?" Reynolds asked. "Daniel Cross." Daniel replied evenly. "I didn't touch him." Laura's head snapped up. "He's lying," she said. "He stepped right into us. His dog scared Evan. He fell." Reynolds nodded once, neither agreeing nor dismissing. "We'll sort that out." As Morales began a basic assessment, Reynolds turned to Rick. "You own this place." Rick wiped his hands on his apron, nodding. "Yes, sir. Have you seen these two here before?" Rick hesitated. His eyes flicked briefly toward Laura, then back to Reynolds. "A couple times," he said slowly. "Always loud. Not usually this." Daniel caught the pause. Rick wasn't lying, but he wasn't telling everything either. Morales adjusted Evan's arm carefully, watching his reaction. His groan came a beat late, too measured. She glanced at Reynolds. Laura noticed the glance. Her voice sharpened. "Is he going to be okay?" "We're calling an ambulance," Morales said. "Let them decide." Reynolds stood and turned back to Daniel. "Where were you standing when he fell?" Daniel pointed to the space he'd occupied. "Here. Between them. I didn't push him. And your dog, under control. He didn't touch anyone." Rex sat beside Daniel now, posture calm, eyes forward, ears relaxed but attentive. Morales glanced at the dog, then at Daniel. "Military?" she asked quietly. "Yes," Daniel said. "Former." Reynolds's brow lifted slightly, but he didn't comment. Laura interrupted, her voice breaking again. "Why are you questioning him like that? My husband is on the floor." Morales straightened. "Because that's how this works." As the paramedics were called, Reynolds began asking questions, simple ones at first. "Where were you sitting? What happened before the fall? Who spoke first?" Laura answered quickly. Too quickly. Her story shifted in small ways. Daniel had been closer, then farther. Evan had slipped, then been shoved. Each version landed with confidence, but the details refused to settle. Evan, meanwhile, kept his eyes half closed, grimacing. Whenever Morales touched his arm, yet his fingers flexed with too much control when he thought no one was watching. Reynolds noticed. He always did. "Ma'am," he said to Laura, or gently, "I need you to answer the question I ask, not the one you think I'm asking." Laura stiffened. "I'm just trying to help." Across the room, Sarah Whitman hovered near the wall, arms folded tight across her chest. Her earlier resolve had given way to unease, but she didn't look away. When Reynolds asked if anyone had seen the fall clearly, she raised her hand. "I was watching," she said again. "He didn't shove him." Laura spun toward her. "You don't know what you saw." Reynolds held up a hand. "Ma'am." Rick shifted closer, his voice low. "Officer, I hate to say this, but they've had issues before. Not just here. Reynolds's eyes sharpened. Explain. Rick swallowed. I've heard from other owners along the highway. Similar scenes, arguments, someone getting hurt. That was enough. Reynolds stepped aside with Morales speaking quietly. Daniel couldn't hear the words, but he saw the shift the moment suspicion redirected. Morales returned to Evan, testing sensation again. Can you squeeze my fingers? Evan hesitated, then did harder than expected. Morales' lips pressed thin. Reynolds pulled out his tablet and began typing cross-referencing names. Laura watched him, her breathing shallow. Evan Miller. Reynolds read aloud. You've filed an injury claim in the past year. Laura froze. Reynolds looked up. Multiple claims, different locations. The room went still again. That's not, Laura began. And a pending policy, Morales added eyes on the screen. Accidental injury, public incident clause. Evan groaned louder as if on cue. Reynolds closed the tablet. We're not drawing conclusions yet, he said. But things aren't lining up, Daniel exhaled slowly. The pieces were finally shifting into place, not cleanly, not all at once, but enough to see the edges. The paramedics arrived their gurney, bumping softly over the threshold. As they moved toward Evan, Laura tightened her grip on his hand, her eyes flicking around the room, counting faces again. Control wasn't gone, but it was slipping. The truth did not arrive with drama. It arrived with paperwork. Officer Reynolds stepped aside with his tablet, the screen reflecting the diner's harsh lights. He spoke quietly into his radio, requesting confirmation from dispatch. The minutes stretched. Evan lay still now, too still, his breathing shallow but steady. Laura's grip on his hand tightened, her knuckles whitening as she watched the officers, not her husband. The paramedics finished their initial check and exchanged a look. One of them, Caleb Turner, a lean man in his early 40s, with sun-reddened skin and a calm, clinical manner, straightened and spoke to Morales in a low voice. Vitals are stable. Pain response is inconsistent. Morales nodded. Reynolds returned his expression unchanged, but something had settled behind his eyes. Dispatch confirmed, he said. Multiple claims filed over the last 18 months. Same policy, same clause. Public incidents with third-party witnesses. Laura shook her head immediately. That's irrelevant. It's not, Reynolds replied. It establishes pattern. A murmur rippled through the room, phones still raised shifted angles. Sarah Whitman exhaled slowly, relief and unease mixing on her face. Rick Thompson leaned against the counter, shoulders sagging the weight of it, finally catching up to him. Reynolds turned to Daniel. Sir, I need your statement on record. Daniel nodded once. He described his actions plainly, where he stood, what he said, what he didn't do. No embellishment. No defensiveness. Rex remained seated beside him, posture calm, eyes tracking the room with quiet vigilance. Laura interrupted. This is unbelievable, she said, voice cracking. You're taking his side. Reynolds held up a hand. We're not taking sides, we're matching stories to evidence. Morales gestured to the phones. And we have video, lots of it. A young man near the window stepped forward hesitantly, offering his phone. Another followed, then another. The footage played in fragments, angles, overlapping timelines aligning. Evan's fall slowed frame by frame. The space between him and Daniel, the lack of contact, Laura's immediate accusation. Reynolds watched without comment. Evan, he said at last, I need you to stand up. Laura tightened her grip. He can't. Caleb met Evan's eyes. "Sir, if your arm is as injured as you say, standing won't worsen it." Evan hesitated, just long enough. He pushed himself up, slowly, carefully. His arm hung at his side, not limp, not protected. The room noticed. Reynolds nodded to Morales. "Cuff them." Laura recoiled. "What?" "No, this is a mistake." Morales stepped forward, her voice firm but respectful. "Ma'am, please turn around." Evan's face hardened. "You can't do this," Weekend Reynolds said. "And we are." As the cuffs clicked shut, the diner fell silent, in a different way, not shocked, but resolved. Laura's shoulders slumped, the performance draining from her face. Evan stared at the floor, jaw clenched, saying nothing. Rick watched them pass, escorted toward the door. He didn't look relieved. He looked tired. Outside, the heat hit like a wall. Sunlight bounced off the asphalt, shimmering. The patrol car doors closed softly, decisively. Daniel stood just beyond the threshold. Rex sat at his side, close enough that Daniel could feel the dog's warmth against his leg. Reynolds approached. "You did the right thing," he said. Daniel shook his head slightly. "I just didn't make it worse." Reynolds studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Sometimes that's the hard part." The paramedics packed up, phones lowered, conversations resumed in low tones. The diner returned to itself, though something had shifted, an awareness that lingered. Daniel stepped back inside briefly to pay his bill. Rick waved him off, then thought better of it. "Next time," he said quietly, "under better circumstances." Daniel offered a small nod. When he stepped back out, Rex rose smoothly, tail low, ears relaxed. Together they walked toward the parking lot, the heat pressing down the day, moving on. Behind them, Red Mesa Grill buzzed back to life, not as if nothing had happened, but as if something had been understood. Sometimes miracles don't arrive as thunder or fire. Sometimes they come as restraint, when a hand chooses not to strike, when truth stands quietly while lies shout, when clarity outlasts chaos. Many people believe God only moves in the extraordinary. But more often, he works through ordinary moments, a stranger who steps in, a witness, who speaks up, a calm voice that refuses to escalate, a truth that surfaces when patience holds the line. In everyday life, you may not see miracles labeled as such. They look like integrity. They sound like silence that refuses to be broken by fear. They feel like doing the right thing when no applause is guaranteed. If this story reminded you that control is stronger than violence, that truth has weight even when it moves slowly, then carry that with you today. Share this story with someone who might need that reminder. Leave a comment and tell us where you're watching from or what part spoke to you most. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next story of courage, restraint, and quiet justice. And may God bless you and protect you. May he watch over your home, your loved ones, and your steps in both calm days and difficult ones. Amen.